Do you think the changing in material supports or changes the functionality of a watch?
Effectively, yeah. I think materials are chosen in the first instance. I mean, I know outside of the core fascination with watches that we share, Faye, people are slightly cynical around certain new materials coming to market. Fundamentally, they are brought to market because they solve one or other problem. And it could be around weight, it could be around resistance, just the wear and tear. And obviously, as we know, for years, the watch industry has borrowed from the aeronautical industry, from the industrial military complex, in effect, to discover and to reuse incredibly tough materials in watchmaking, because they solve a functional issue, which is how do you protect something that is incredibly vulnerable on your wrist, that can be banged and banged and banged. And I think that's the start of that functionality process. And then after that, it's imbued with other qualities. I mean, for instance, the Carbon-Tech Panerai is supremely light. It adds value. But then again, in the context of a bronze watch, you're wearing a watch with heft. And for another part of the market, wearing something substantial on the wrist is what gives wristwatch wearing its attractiveness.
But wrist porn, effectively. But talking about the bronze, IWC do it. There's a few brands that have started to play with bronze, or introduce, not play with, but introduce and explore. What I quite like about that, and going back to it being a unique piece, is that bronze will always the patina. Yeah. So it will always change. That will give it its exclusiveness or its uniqueness to the wearer, because as the time goes on, it will change it. But
to your point, Faye, about the bronze, it was interesting when it started to come back into the market about 10 years ago. Panerai did a beautiful piece. And obviously others have followed suit. It was more of a poetic execution, and in those particular pieces, it was talking to the heritage of those brands around designing watches designed to go to the sea, in effect. And obviously, the bronze we recognise from the Scapander, which is the name of the old-fashioned helmet worn by divers before the invention of scuba, and all of those tropes played out in the watches, and the added additional functionality, if you want to use this term, because I do think how the wearer treats a watch, uses a watch, is a form of its functionality. It does offer this ability to patina, meaning that it discolors. It takes on a hue entirely of its own, depending on how it's lived, depending whether it's ever been in the sea, whether it's affected by climatic conditions.
To your point, in terms of what you referenced, Tudor and their silver watch, there's a reason why watches aren't made in silver. It's just such a soft alloy, and it marks incredibly well. Which doesn't lend itself particularly to a sort of utilitarian timepiece, whereas some of the materials we're seeing now, whether it's the Carbotech, whether it's carbon fibre, we were introduced to DLC a few years ago, and all of these combinations that are supporting makes it just much more wearable for the user. Whereas it's not to say that can't be worn, this beautiful Cartier Panther, but there's a different element to it, and gold is much more. It will scratch much quicker.
I think that's an interesting point, because, as you say, as much as watch designers, watch brands want to create watches that are redoubtable, they're robust and long-lasting, there are customers who actually do want their own personality to shine through in their watch. And as we've seen, again, to go back to the vintage market, some of the most valuable watches are some of the most distressed, in effect, because they carry patina once again, whether it's faded bezels or faded dials even. But I think to your point about whether distress becomes personalization, that's where you kind of choose which metal you wish to wear. And bronze has been highly successful. I would argue more successful than I would have anticipated, given that it does patina, and given it has some operational issues, which is why case backs on bronze watches tend not to be bronze. They'll be bronze coloured, but bronze against the skin will discolour the skin eventually. So there are some workarounds required depending on the materials you use. But from the brand's point of view, what the materials really bring is flexibility of execution. And I think we saw that most blindingly when the Royal Oak Offshore launched in the first full carbon case at Audemars Piguet in the 2007, I believe, in the Alinghi, and limited edition model for the America's Cup. And suddenly the offshore is quite a complex piece of case engineering, and obviously it's chronographs, it has pushers, so there's a fundamentally huge amount of work you can do to swap out all those different elements. And I think for brands, as much as they want to create a broad collection, they want to offer choice to their market. They also just downright enjoy being able to play with all the different ingredients, and they're always searching for ingredients that will fit neatly with one another.
It's their creative element. If they're not bringing out a new collection, which we don't see year on year, and it's interesting because you were talking about Audemars Piguet, 2 collections effectively. So how do they enhance that? How does it grow? How do they have appeal to a wider audience? Because with the Royal Oak initially, it was just started in steel, so for example, if we're looking at something like the Big Bang with Hublot, and they introduced in the gold this year. So what they've done is the watch itself isn't new. This is the Spirit, but they've introduced it in yellow gold, which we've not seen. But with their own alloys, they've named it Magic Gold. Yeah.
The magical properties of gold being, in this case, that Hublot argue this is unscratchable, which comes back to your earlier point, Faye. What would perhaps prevent someone investing into a gold watch? Well, it's going to get marked.
Should we test it?
Go on. I do have a friend who dropped his gold watch on the second day of ownership and put a massive dink in it. And it did break his heart. He's moved on, but he's decided it's personalised it and it's my watch, and I dinked it, so we go forward equal, which is fine. If someone else had dinked it, it'd have been another story. But my point is, so brands are still working through all of the opportunities that they are able to develop in-house. Some brands are fundamentally, they are foundries in terms of what they can create in materials. Others are constantly searching for opportunities, and they are negotiating exclusivities with outside companies who are producing these extraordinary composites, which is effectively what we're looking at when we're looking at carbon. I mean, it's a limitless list now almost of combinations of carbon that you can now find on the market. But what they boil down to is that they are composite materials, which are constantly being renewed, improved, refined to create the best combination of, in most cases, lightness, which is, I think, probably one of the more valuable attributes now at the moment. We could discuss this maybe this is for another chat, Faye, but it's quite interesting that some parts of the business rely on. I remember picking up one of the Breitling for Bentley watches many years ago, and it was heavy.
Yeah, you don't want to fall off a boat with that on your wrist.
You would keep going down, I'm afraid. But so I think there's a market for watches that carry heft, and I think the full gold execution of watches is often worn by people who like to feel that they have something on their wrists. By the same token, the more contemporary marketplace seems to reflect the desire to wear something that's very light and therefore doesn't feel it's burdening you as you wear it. So that combination of lightness and robustness, and if there's a sort of desirable fleck in the composite, if there's something that gives it a standout, then all the better, I think. Yeah.
So the functionality does tie in with the metal type based on a sports watch probably needs to be quite light. A dress watch, we tend to see those a lot more in precious metal for evening wear because it enhances the elegance of a gentleman in a suit.